Hi, I'm Esther.
And I'm Sean.
I write about AI news here at Tech Target in Massachusetts.
And I edit Esther's stories.
We're here to talk with tech experts about everything AI and ChatGPT.
Don't forget Google Gemini.
Whether it's who's ahead in the generative AI race, the metaverse, digital twins, or even the latest in autonomous vehicles, we've got it covered. Right, Sean?
Yep, we've got it covered. Hi, everyone. We're back with another Targeting AI podcast from Tech Target Editorial. This is a special post-election episode, and our guest is Mackenzie Holland, senior news writer for Tech Target Editorial, covering big tech, federal and state regulation, and other issues associated with compliance and regulation. She has reported and written extensively on issues involving the tech industry in the election and has also covered federal and state regulation of AI. Welcome aboard the pod for the second time, Mackenzie. We're going to talk about President-elect Donald Trump and all things AI.
Sounds great. Thanks for having me, Sean and Esther.
We are so happy to have you. So it has happened. President-elect Trump is going to take office. What does this mean for the AI industry?
Well, it's likely going to mean less regulation for the AI industry. Trump's economic platform, if you take a look at his website and the platform that they have listed there, being against regulation and deregulation is a huge theme across his platform. So walking back what he calls costly and burdensome regulations, and that could entail anything from repealing Biden's executive order on artificial intelligence, which wasn't regulation, but it was kind of a step forward towards that of laying the groundwork for regulation, potentially setting some guardrails around artificial intelligence use. So it could include that. It could include targeting agencies like the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, the Federal Trade Commission, and what rules they're able to make. So really, the landscape for AI is going to be a lot less regulation and concerns about that.
Okay, let's drill down a little bit into this. Last year, President Joe Biden's executive order on AI was a big deal. It seemed to have some measure of bipartisan support. I mean, even though it was basically a framework to put stuff in action in the future. So how much of that would President-elect Trump be likely to scrap? Would he be likely to perhaps pick up some of it and put it in his White House office on AI, which I believe he established in his previous term? Would he be likely to keep some of that stuff or not?
Sure. So repealing the executive order on AI is specifically mentioned in his platform. And so he can't repeal things that have already been done and have already been accomplished. So some of the federal agencies, after 90 days, after 180 days, they issued reports on what they've done as far as meeting those AI standards that Biden wanted the agencies to start developing for their AI use. So there are concrete things that the agencies have already done since the executive order was issued that Trump can't repeal, that he can't walk back. But there are pieces such as the executive order utilizes the Defense Production Act to compel AI companies to provide safety tests to the government. That's something that could get the axe. There are things that essentially any kind of the guardrails that the executive order tried to implement for AI companies and agencies, you might just not see anything happen with that if that gets repealed. And it's just unlikely that the Trump administration will continue anything from this executive order, especially since he specifically mentions repealing it in his platform.
What about stuff like maybe seemingly innocuous stuff like encouraging more use of AI in federal agencies and getting more employees trained in how to use it? Would that stuff kind of likely to survive?
Yeah, I'm sure those pieces that don't hamper the use of AI that or don't restrict the use of AI that the Trump administration might view as restrictive. I'm sure that those pieces will continue, especially with Elon Musk at Trump's side. And he's obviously someone that's very big in the tech industry. He's got his own AI company.
I was just about to step in and ask because I spoke to someone yesterday and I was saying, Trump, obviously, it seems like Elon Musk will probably have a role in this administration a lot more than like other tech vendors. What do you think that might mean exactly? Does this mean that Musk has always been like open, 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 even though sometimes people say his own company is not open? Can we see more of something like that? Or what do you think we might see?
There have been rumors and talks about something about the Department of Government Efficiency, that Musk might step in and really clean up the processes, remove the red tape for projects and for businesses. And I don't know how that will balance out, because Musk does have several of his own companies that could be in conflict with that. So I think it's a big question mark for everyone with what Musk's role in the government could look like, what that could mean. There's not really a lot of clear answers on that at this point. I think that's going to be we're waiting until Trump starts making some appointments, and we're going to see where Musk fits into that, because it's really been within the last like month or two that we've really seen Musk at Trump's side. So it's going to be something that we're going to have to see play out.
Very interesting. You mentioned this, that it's going to be kind of like less regulation, right? Do you think that this would give, I think, tech vendors more freedom? Or do you think that because other companies like the EU already have this strict guided regulation in place, it's still going to be like business as usual, where they have to follow the regulations of other countries that are more strict? So that might translate over to the US.
Yes, it's a great question. Just based on people that I've spoken with, the tech industry kind of, especially seeing Musk come to Trump's side, even, former Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos posted a congratulations on X. I think that the tech industry might be looking at the Trump administration and to Trump as an ally, as they're facing stricter fines, scrutiny, regulatory regimens in the European Union. They're facing a lot of challenges over there. And they were facing a stricter environment under the Biden administration as well, through the executive order on AI. So it wasn't looking like they were going to get a lot of leeway from regulation in the US, even though Congress hasn't passed anything and was struggling to pass AI regulation. The Biden administration cared about AI risk, cared about AI safety, and that might not be such a prominent focus under the Trump administration. He might be more focused on giving leeway to the private sector, opening up innovation, not so much having that focus on AI safety and AI risk. And so the tech industry might be viewing Trump as an ally as they're facing regulatory scrutiny in the European Union. They might be looking for somebody to support them here in their home base in the US.
Oh, that's a
And more
really
so,
good
maybe they feel like Trump might do that more than the Biden administration and presidential nominee, Democratic nominee Kamala Harris might
That's a
have.
really good point. I had not even thought about that. Quick question. Do you remember before generative AI, there was this AI race with China? Okay. And that seems to have abated a little bit, but I think it's still there in the background. And I mean, maybe it's abated a little bit because China's economy is not doing that well, or who knows. But I know Trump made a kind of a big deal about it when he was president previously. Yeah, I think it had something to do with his White House office on AI. So what's going on with that? How will Trump? Trump's going to put increased tariffs on China. So how does that fit? How does Trump? How does that all fit into the AI war with China?
Sure. So again, I think China does have a lot of worries domestically, and they're really focused on that right now. As for Trump administration, he implemented tariffs on China under his administration that continued into the Biden administration. Biden didn't get rid of those tariffs, and so just looking at it from that perspective, maybe Trump sees that as okay, this has been addressed kind of, and we're in this even keel place with China, though he has threatened to impose or just proposed potentially a 10% tariff across the board on all goods imported into the US and a 60% tariff against China. So if he does move forward with those tariffs, most analysts that I've spoken to have said that will be very negative for businesses and consumers. For the China tariffs specifically, a 60% tariff could trigger retaliation from China, especially even when they're at a place right now where things are kind of even keel. If he moves ahead with those proposed tariffs, China could retaliate in a number of different ways. There are a lot of companies that operate in China that import goods, from Apple smartphones to computers, solar panels. there are a lot of companies that import goods from China. And so there could be a lot of retaliatory measures there if Trump does move forward with that 60% tariff. And he's also proposed the 10% tariff across the board on all imported goods into the US, which will even potentially affect allies. And that could create some rocky roads there. Bottom line is the proposed tariffs, that's been kind of the number one thing that analysts have pointed to as the most harmful to businesses.
Okay, what about by extension Chinese semiconductors? I mean, most of them are made in Taiwan, right? By the Taiwanese semiconductor manufacturing company, and Nvidia uses them. Everybody uses them. So, what if China is seen as having designs on Taiwan, right? It would want to bring Taiwan back into its own territory, and so I think Trump is seen as more favorable to that, to letting China do what it wants a little bit in that on that sphere. I know Musk has spoken about this. Do you see any threat to the world supply of semiconductors anymore because Trump would be president? Or?
It's interesting because I think with Trump bringing people in the tech industry close to his side, even his running mate, JD Vance, was a tech entrepreneur, venture capitalist. So I don't think the importance of semiconductors is going to go without notice under the Trump administration, and the national security issues of having China take over Taiwan and Taiwan semiconductors. I can't imagine that would be something that would fly, but again, I don't know, and it's going to be something that plays out because again, the national security implications of chips for the U.S. are very high.
So, how do you think the him being now going to take office again will affect FTC and DOJ legal and enforcement actions against tech AI vendors and enterprises that use AI in hiring and lending?
The FTC is likely to face a shakeup uh, as far as like Lena Khan's job probably is on the line because Trump can appoint his own chair of the commission, and Trump's entire platform is about deregulation and being against regulation. That's automatically going to impact these enforcement agencies who, in some capacity can make their own rules. And under the Biden administration, we've seen these agencies really trying to create new rules and move them forward. And they've already faced legal challenges under the Biden administration. The proposed climate rule from the SEC, it's been paused because of the significant amount of legal challenges that it faced, the non-compete ban from the Federal Trade Commission. So they've already faced a lot of legal challenges and backlash for the rules under the Biden administration. That's not going to get better under the Trump administration, especially with his platform being about less government and less regulation.
Okay, so one thing I've discovered reading your coverage of antitrust action and just following it in the news is that there's a lot of Republicans who feel that the big tech are monopolists as well. So will there be any impetus in Congress to kind of maybe push some regulation forward despite Trump or not?
I don't know about Congress pushing forward legislation. We saw a slew of antitrust bills when Biden first took office that didn't get anywhere. And so I don't think we would see that under Congress, under the Trump administration. I don't know about, I think, again, with the focus of being deregulation, I don't know if we'll see a lot more antitrust action, but a DOJ suit was filed against Google under the former Trump administration. And so I don't think they'll go without complete scrutiny, but it's going to be a lot less antitrust action under the Trump administration than what we were seeing under the Biden administration.
So is that Google lawsuit the one that the federal judge ruled against Google?
The
That one
serch
there?
suit.
Yeah. Okay. So the serch suit. So that's going to be Google's appealing that.
Yes.
Is there any chance the federal government would say just let them appeal it if it's under Trump, and then just say that's it, we're dropping it? Or is that got a life of its own in the courts?
I'm unsure because it does have a life of its own in the courts, but the Trump administration will have a say and will have sway with the DOJ who's brought the case. So they could lean more over accepting remedy proposals, maybe that wouldn't be as crazy and big as breaking up Google. That might be off the table under a Trump administration. But again, I'm really kind of unsure of how that might play out. We might see more lenient action in the remedy phase against Google than we might have. But yeah, the Trump administration, Trump will have an impact on existing and any forthcoming antitrust cases just because of his platform.
Okay, one more quick follow-up on that. With all these antitrust legal action against not just Google, but Amazon, Meta, Microsoft, NVIDIA, some were settled, some were dropped, some continue. It seems to me none of them really focused on AI. It focused on different aspects of, consumer, monopoly practices, stuff like that. Do any of those legal actions involve AI specifically, or generative AI? Or
Well, the cases are brought based on existing law, and so like the FTC's mandate is to protect is to bring cases on consumer protection and making sure there's no harm as outlined in the FTC Act. And that's very specific if you look at that legal language. And so they have to have an actionable case based on consumer harm that's been caused. And so AI might be too new for them because they're just now bringing cases against these tech giants who've been operating for 15, 20 years, and for products like Google search. And so I don't know. I kind of feel like AI is maybe not at the place where they're going to be bringing lawsuits about AI harms until they have enough evidence of the harms that it's created to bring a case, because we've seen them have challenges even bringing these cases against tech companies. The FTC's lawsuit against Meta was paused and tossed. The Google case, though they did get a win in that one, they've had challenges bringing cases against these tech giants.
What about the everyday work of the FTC, and just basic algorithmic bias, right? So
Yeah.
Does that depend on the personnel that's in the FTC? Does that depend on rules? I mean, the FTC has already published advisories saying, look, we're enforcing this stuff. Can Trump just go to them and say, stop doing that? Or what happens there?
Trump can influence the FTC to shelve certain cases or maintain certain cases, as long as it's I think the FTC has to really stay strictly in their lane. And in the case against Meta, they had some arguments, some new theories that they introduced about harms. And that's partly why the case, some believe that the case was tossed, was because of this introduction of new theories of harm. And I think as long as the FTC kind of has very strict and concrete evidence of harms, then those cases will probably get pushed through, or those direct warnings to companies or direct actions against companies will be able to get pushed through. But as far as concretely taking action against large AI system, I'm unsure how that will fare under a Trump administration.
But what about FTC's actions against enterprises that are improperly using AI? Like not big cases, just small cases of harm, and some regional bank used biased algorithm, and the FTC finds out about it, and they say, stop doing that. Can they still do that under Trump?
Yeah, I mean, it's the FTC's mandate is to protect against consumer harms and have companies abide by consumer protection laws. And so, again, I'm not sure how Trump will shake up the presidential authority over the FTC and what they can do. I don't think we're going to know until he takes office and if he does something. But I mean, currently the FTC can function within its mandate and issue directives against companies who've caused consumer harm. And they very clearly stated that AI falls into this category. If they're seeing that AI is causing consumer harm, they will take action against companies. If Trump appoints someone as chair that's maybe less of a mindset of Lena Khan, of wanting to really go after businesses, then maybe we'll see less action. But again, it does depend on who Trump appoints as chair and if he issues any other directives or mandates to kind of shake up what we're seeing with the FTC. So again, that's kind of, we're just going to wait and see.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mackenzie. Obviously this is all like a wait and see approach. We really appreciate you joining us once again to talk about a very important topic.
Thank you for having me.
Our next guest is David Nicholson, Chief Technology Advisor at the Futurum Group. He's also a contributor at the 6-5 and a guest lecturer at Cambridge Judge Business School. He is a consultant for DNA Consultant. Thank you so much for joining us, David.
Thanks. Great to be here.
So, to kick it off, what does the re-election of Donald Trump mean for the AI industry?
I think that there are many, many layers to that. I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is implementation of the Chips and Science Act moving forward. So, from a foundational layer, from an infrastructure layer, we've been trying to eliminate what you could think of as single points of failure in our supply chain for the hardware on top of which AI is built. So it'll be really interesting to see how that changes. The Biden administration has been really, really good about pushing forward funding for these sorts of things, while at the same time, the Biden administration has attached a lot of, call it Biden administration agenda items or strings to the spending of the money. So some of those priorities could be juggled around in a way, but that remains to be seen. I think that funding for AI in particular is sort of a bipartisan agreed upon thing that we want to do. And then the other initial thing that comes to mind is this question of how do we provide for the insatiable amount of the insatiable appetite that AI has for electricity? And I think that if you accept that the sort of traditional right side of the aisle has always said we need more nukes, I think that the traditional left side of the aisle is coming around to the same point, and I think rallying around issues associated with carbon dioxide. So I think that I don't see that it's directly tied to the Trump administration, but I think during the Trump administration, we're going to see more talk about nuclear power being implemented for AI. So let me take a breath there. I think those are two good places to start.
I have a quick follow up on that before I ask you another big general question. So
Yeah.
as part of the Chips Act is subsidies for semiconductor manufacturing in the U.S., right?
Yes.
And I think Intel in particular.
Yes.
So would that continue under a Trump protectionist administration, because he has talked about manufacturing here. So, but on the other hand, Intel lately has been doing really poorly,
Yes.
and it's not keeping up in the race and unlikely to catch up, even if it does build new plants here in the U.S.
Yeah.
So, and then there's the specter of the AMD takeover of Intel,
Yeah.
which might still be on the table, even though they pulled back from that. So, how does that all fit in under a Trump presidency? Do you think he would seek to end the subsidies for Intel and spread it around to different people, or what?
And I feel like I'm wading into deep water. I'm definitely not a political correspondent, but I do pay attention to these things. I think it's fair to say that Trump administration is going to focus on domestic production of things, especially things that are of critical strategic importance for the country. So in that light, could there be a reshuffling of which companies get the money? Sure. But I think that the ethos associated with domestic production, I think that those two things are bipartisan and very, very well aligned, despite the fact that they may be coming from different incentives on either side of the aisle. So I don't think there's much of a change that will happen there. I think that Intel's fate is in the hands of Intel and the market. I have said publicly, I've characterized Intel's move to get in bed with the federal government as essentially federalizing their foundry operations to a degree. And that makes it hard for them to be acquired, to be carved up. You've got this specter of other things, other considerations in the background. So I think on balance, domestic production of a lot of things is going to be a focus of the Trump administration.
Okay, great. Thanks. Next question is the Biden executive order on AI. Okay, so that was a big deal, even though none of it was encapsulated in immediate legislation.
Yeah.
What's the future of that? Is Trump likely to scrap it wholesale, keep parts of it, or what?
Yeah, no, definitely not scrap it wholesale. There's something behind a lot of those concerns moving forward. We talk about the post quantum world. We see what are considered to be adversaries of the United States gathering information with the eye toward being able to crack into it at a future date, leveraging quantum technology, leveraging AI technology. So, trying to get ahead of and be aware of the types of threats and opportunities that AI presents. Again, I think that's a bipartisan issue where the devil is always in the details, and so to the extent that a Trump administration perceives that there are in, any underlying parts of any legislation that tries to limit what they would see as free speech, then there could be argument and discussion over specific points. But again, at large, pretty bipartisan concern that that AI is a genie that we only want to very carefully let out of the bottle if possible.
Very interesting. So, a big ally of Trump is Elon Musk, right? Musk is in talks to close 40 billion in new funding with his AI company XAI. What might possibly happen with that? Does this mean that Trump now have a leg up, especially because he's supposed to like take kind of like a position, cabinet role in the Trump administration? What does this mean with his relationship against OpenAI? What do you think about that?
I want to believe that the campaign is over and now any government, whether it was a Harris administration or a Trump administration, moves forward with the idea that they are governing and they're working for all of us, regardless of party, and that includes companies who maybe didn't support Trump in the election campaign. So I don't. I mean, certainly having Elon as a buddy lets him tap into a certain perspective in the world of AI, and so the best answer I can give on that is that Elon Musk's perspective has been that if you're not careful about the training of large language models, what you do is you end up inducing what he would call lies. Now, what does that mean? Well, evidence, or his evidence, he would say, would be something like querying Google for images of Nazi soldiers and having, someone who looks like they're of African descent or Asian descent in a Nazi uniform. It's like, well, no. Well, how did that happen? Well, when parameters were put together and weights were adjusted, we tried to say, look, we don't want model collapse, which is what we refer to in the Wharton AI program. Model collapse is where the model goes out and looks, and if it sees predominantly white faces when you say, show me a CEO, over time, it will narrow its responses to basically showing essentially nearly one image of one person. It's like a conglomeration. And so in order to make it more inclusive, we put these weights in that at the other end of the equation can generate things that are absurd. So Elon's position, not advocating for it or against it, is that you need to be very, very careful. He wants this absolute objectivity in large language models in particular. So him having the ear of the president and the administration, I think could be meaningful in that regard. I think that when AI companies talk about openness, openness doesn't just mean I'm giving you my software for free. According to Elon's perspective, and the reason why it's important is because he's got the ear of the administration, right? Elon's perspective would be it's only open if you allow us to see into how you're training the model, what the weights are, how these transformers are processing this information so that we can see if biases were intentionally put into the system. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with putting, my personal opinion, nothing wrong with putting biases into the system. I have 3 daughters. I want them, if they're going to search for something, I want them to see girl people, right? And so it's okay as long as there is transparency. So I think that would be sort of the biggest Elon factor, is this Elon's championing in his mind the idea of transparency, honesty. Again, I'm in his mind, honesty from an AI perspective. And he doesn't think that OpenAI is pursuing that at this point. He's going to be the loudest voice in the room when it comes to a lot of this stuff.
Do you think that he might also be the loudest voice when it comes to open? Like open versus closed. That has been one of his arguments against OpenAI, that they're not so open. But might that translate into being in the ears of the president about that?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Now, does that mean that there would be legislation about open? I don't know. I think definitely it's good to have that conversation in the public sphere so people can decide. People can decide, how much transparency do I need? These things are black boxes in a certain way. You really can't peer under the covers and truly understand how things are being generated. But you can look and see how weighting is manipulated at one end. Yeah, it will definitely, this idea of open will probably be defined largely by what Elon Musk considers to be open.
That's pretty amazing. So going to a completely different topic here. Before the rise of generative AI, there was the AI war with China. Who's ahead in AI? And in those days, we weren't thinking about GPT. We were thinking about just big, sophisticated predictive AI systems or defense systems or whatever. So, and I feel like I remember in Trump's first presidency, he made an issue out of this. He created the White House Office on AI, stuff like that. What's going to happen with the AI war in China, or will that be just part of the whole trade, simmering trade war with tariffs?
Yes, both. I think but again, it is a bit of, this is kind of cool because really, there's a bipartisan sanity thread here. We have just recently rolled out increasingly stringent guidance, legislation, but it's guidance with a hammer to our trading partners that effectively prevent them from selling products not only that were produced with what we consider to be sensitive technology in the US, but even if those things are produced on top of those machines outside of the country. So if Taiwan buys equipment to manufacture semiconductors, but the equipment was from a US company, or used intellectual property from a US company, the United States government feels that it's okay to say, you're not allowed to sell anything you manufacture using any of that IP to certain entities in China. If you think about from a pure market perspective, it's like, well, wait, what? Isn't Taiwan a sovereign country? How can the United States tell these people? And it's like, well, Taiwan and individual Taiwanese companies can decide to say, screw you, I'm going to sell whoever I want to. When you sell me your equipment, when you license me your IP, I get to do with it whatever I choose. And the United States attitude has been, okay, fine, get ready to suffer the consequences. So there's been a lot of pressure to restrict access by China in particular to the underlying semiconductor stuff that powers these things. Now, what does that do effectively? Most people think it just sort of sets China back a year and a half, that eventually they're going to get there. And they have demonstrated the ability to come up with their own versions of things. And it's not just steal and copy. It's, let's take a look at what exists and let's make it better. So if we're honest about this, China is no longer just in the business of copying stuff. They actually improve stuff. So we shouldn't underestimate them. So will that continue moving forward? Absolutely. Will it be part of trade negotiations? I can imagine somebody like Trump will use that as a hammer to, to absolutely come in even stronger, restricting their access to various technologies. So yeah, I would say it's going to accelerate, but don't be mistaken. This is something that has been ongoing, and it's a concern on all sides.
So, how would the Trump election affect FTC and DOJ legal and enforcement actions against tech and AI vendors? How do you think it might? And enterprises that use AI in like things like hiring and lending, for example.
Oh, so geez. Again, I'm trying to be like really, really objective here. So people shouldn't read into the way that I respond as advocating or not. I think it's clear that that to the extent things like diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives are have bubbled up and have been baked into what FTC and DOJ do, that there may be a backing off from that. And at the extreme, that would look like people no longer being measured or held accountable for what many believe are worthy goals. And so I think that there will be changes there. Frankly, from where I sit, with my affiliation with the programs that I work in at Wharton, in particular, I think that the private sector has embraced DEI and ESG initiatives, and they don't necessarily need to have the DOJ or the FTC after them at this point. Now, on the other hand, on the other side of the equation, or sort of additionally, there's this question of what constitutes free speech versus misinformation, disinformation, malinformation. And there's a big philosophical question there. And not everyone agrees what constitutes First Amendment rights, what constitutes censorship by proxy on part of the government. Is it a public? Is it the government forcing something, or is it a private company choosing to enforce policies? There are a lot of questions that are broiling around this. With the Trump administration, I would argue that the side that skews in favor of calling something disinformation, that's censorship. Put all the information up, let people decide. The best way to deal with disinformation is to counter it with gooder information. That would be their position. And since they are now in power, I would expect that over time, within FTC, DOJ, those sort of philosophies will bubble up. That's the best way that I can answer that.
Okay, so continuing on with these federal enforcement agencies, FTC Chair Lena Khan, not a big fan of Trump, vice versa. She's likely to depart.
Right.
But what's going to happen to all these, federal legal actions against Google and other big tech companies? Are you likely to see, a dramatic pullback from that, or keep it going to some extent, because there is some bipartisan support for that too? So
Right.
what's
Right.
going on there?
Right. This is purely world according to Dave here. But it feels like you could say, and again, left and right don't even mean anything anymore, in my opinion. So, but we sort of use that as a proxy for Team A versus Team B. Team A looks at Google and says, "Ooh, big is bad. They're doing big bad things. Break them up." However, they kind of like the fact that Google has gone along, that most of the people at Google are really on their team. And so when it comes to this question of the dissemination of information, most of the folks on the Google side are like, yeah, I think that's disinformation. Now, Team B is actually mad at Google they're also mad at Google, but for a different reason. It's not so much you're a big business and you've been wildly successful. It's what they've done with that power. And Team B, who's in power now, perceives Google to be in the tank with Team A. And so you could have increased scrutiny with the changing of the guard,
Oh,
but
yeah.
but for completely different reasons. So I think companies like all of them, all of the big tech companies, they're going to face scrutiny, and they can't win for losing. Let's just say that.
Well, thank you so much for those perspectives.
Yeah, thank you so much, David. We really appreciate your time and for jumping on to discuss all of this very quickly. Thank you
Sure.
to our audience and for listening. Please feel free to share this podcast in all your social media platforms, and we will see you next time on the Targeting AI podcast.